I've been amazed at the work that's been done through the years as we've moved into the parsonages to renovate and update and just make comfortable for the new pastor on shoestring budgets. And Annie and I have been privy to that. And now Gary's enjoying that. Now, why am I saying all of this? While we have been fortunate enough to go through renovations, most of those were done while we were still in the home. That's an interesting thing if you've ever been a part of a renovation in the midst of that. I find that it gives us a good excuse to practice your Christianity. Things never happen on time. There are often unexpected surprises, and you know how it goes. In conversation with one of the construction workers one day, though, I remember him telling me how much easier it is to start a house from scratch rather than to have to renovate it, to recreate it, to reinvent it, to resituate it. It gets messy. It gets sloppy. As I said, things never turn out the way you thought. They never happen on time. How much easier just to start from scratch. And I wonder if God didn't think the same thing when these people from Israel came home again, back from exile, thinking to himself, I got to rethink what I'm going to do with these people yet again. Their hearts were raw. Their dreams were shattered. They had so much not to look forward to. Their attitudes toward their captors were less than positive, understandably. It would have been a whole lot easier if he could just started with a whole new group of promised people instead of having to create with them a new sense of dependency upon him and to diffuse their angry with God attitude for yet another captivity. Being in captivity, though, will mess with your mind. If you've ever known a POW or you've ever known someone who's been held against their will politically, it will mess with your mind. In Psalm 137, David talks about the paralyzing effect of captivity. Weeping, we sat beside the rivers of Babylon as we remembered Zion. On the willows, we hung our harps as our captors asked us to sing a song of Zion. How can we sing a song of Zion in a strange land? Captivity does strange things to you. As I keep reading this passage from Isaiah, the word that keeps standing out to me is imagination. God, the Creator, is fueled in His work by an unfettered imagination. That nothing that He can't think about cannot be created. How many of you ever had an imaginary friend? Did any of you ever have an imaginary friend? What was his name, Tamara, or her name? Charger. Did any of your children have imaginary friends? She's not going to tell. Anybody else imaginary friend? What was that about, Tamara, for you creating that imaginary friend? You created one. I've never had one. I've never known anyone that's had one. I've always found it fascinating, though, because it says to me that there's something about people who can do that, that says their imagination, their life outside of reality is full and rich, full of all kinds of possibilities and capabilities. Think how much that we often are down on the people who have vivid imaginations. Oh, he's just got a vivid imagination. Sometimes those imaginary friends are poo-pooed and they're not given the full recognition that they should get. Children grow out of that. Charger's no longer a part of your life, I presume. Years ago, when I served a church in Chattanooga, right across the Tennessee River and the big aquarium, there was a billboard campaign that erupted across the city. At first blush, it was not pretty. All it was pictured was an abandoned field, stubby grass, and tires that appeared to be outcast, long replaced by retreads or new tires. And these tires were scattered throughout the stubby fields. The most poignant thing about that whole billboard campaign was the sentence printed beneath it. Can you see a garden? Some could, some couldn't. The way I see it, the world is far too short on people who can see the garden and more who can smell what's blooming in it. The world is short on people who live by Hebrews 11 faith. That even though they have nothing tangible to present to them that things can be different, they believe. By faith, Noah built his ark to save his household. By faith, Abraham obeyed. He moved across to a strange land when he had no idea where he was going. By faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish when the walls of Jericho came down because she had received and hid the spies. It's the same kind of faith that comes to us from the prophet Habakkuk when he uttered these totally impractical words of faith that are among my favorite. Though the fig tree does not blossom, and though no fruit is on the vines, though the produce of the olive field fails and the fields yield no food, though the flock is come off or cut off from the fold and there's no herd in the stalls, yet will I rejoice in the Lord. Yet will I rejoice in the God of my salvation. I don't know where your tire field needs a garden planted in it. I don't know what it's going to take to help you see that a garden could grow there instead of old tires that had been cast off. I don't know where you've lost hope and where you need some refurbishing, some restoration, some redemption. You know, and God knows. For me as a pastor and for us as church leaders, we know it's no great mystery that our church is at a very pivotal time in our life. But for any church that's growing and maturing and trying on for size who it is and trying to take huge steps of faith, it is natural that we should find ourselves in a place of inquiry. It's a little bit like art building or taking up our family and walking them across a path to what says is a promised land. As congregation leaders, we continue to try to identify our goals and objectives. We try to look at all of the programs and the ministries that are uniquely who we are and that we want to keep no matter what. We are in the midst of trying to identify a new crop of leaders that could lead us into a future that's not so certain. In the midst of that, we're trying to prepare teens for what it means to have a more personal relationship with Jesus Christ and to make a commitment to have that personal relationship and to become an active member. We are touring our building and looking at it yet again with honest eyes to say, what do we really need of this building to do ministry? And what could we let go if we had to let go? We're trying to discover again as a leadership team what it means to be connectional, what it means to be a part of the larger church that provides for us so many resources, pastoral, missional, and otherwise, so we can do amazing ministry through the Holy Spirit around the world. It won't be easy. It's going to require great courage. It's going to require vivid imaginations. It's going to require tenacity. It's going to require speaking the truth in love to one another as we see it. It's going to require intense and purposeful individual and communal discerning prayer. And most of all, friends, it's going to require that we have a collective memory that Emmanuel, God, is with us. And no matter what happens, we are never alone. You can read into this all that you want. You can take it at surface value. I suggest that you hear it with the understanding that we serve a God who is awesome and wondrous in power, who gives us a vision of a new heaven and a new earth, and who is always about not judging finally, but giving a word of hope and promise for whatever the future may hold. My prayer is that we can have that same kind of faith. And in the midst of whatever desolation or in the midst of whatever difficulty we may find ourselves, that we can look beyond and see that there really is a garden. Thanks be to God.